During his tenure at WDAO is when the rise of Dayton music, the 60s and the 70s. He was also responsible for making sure that a lot of as rap came in, years later when rap came into the music industry, for removing the illicit lyrics, the explicit rap lyrics from the air. He stood up and refused to, said he was not going to air that on Dayton airwaves. So there's a lot to his story. I'm going to let him tell the rest.
Well, if I ever need a PR person.
And you know what? I apologize. I'm stumbling through.
And a dear friend.
I'm stumbling through it.
No, it's thank you. I'm very honored to be able to chat with you. Marsha, if you'd like to sit here and rest your back, you can.
Oh, thank you.
I still try to stand up. Very honored to be with you this afternoon. It's been an interesting week. I'm doing some volunteer work with the Ombudsman, and you may know, but I didn't, what the Ombudsman do. And one of the things that we are licensed and have been trained to do is investigate nursing home conditions. They've been getting a lot of complaints about nursing homes. And this week I was in Grafton Hills Nursing Home for the first time. And an interesting thing happened. Myself, Aretha Phillips, who's a local broadcaster, most of you remember her from Channel 2, she asked me to be involved. And she has two elderly sisters that she takes care of. And it was a member of the Ombudsman Committee. We were on the 3rd floor, and we were about to exit. And this white gentleman in a wheelchair rode up to us, and his speech was not audible. You can understand a thing he said. And Megan from the Ombudsman office bent down to hear him say, would she help him register to vote? He wanted to vote. And she took his name and number and said she would look into it. And as we entered the elevator, he looked at him and said, I hate Donald Trump. And I'm like, wow, you know, here's a guy that can barely talk, this white guy that's in a nursing home, and that's his mentality. And one of the things I wanted to bring up and get your opinion of, I had a very interesting conversation. I am a member of the National Alliance of Small Business Leadership Council. And on talking to one of the board members this week, who was white, I found that he was very offended about the NFL players taking a knee. So we had a long conversation. We talked for about an hour about his opinion and my opinion. And his opinion was, what if I was standing behind a black man and he was being harassed by a white man, and I stood in front of the black man to defend him, and then he turned around and punched me in the face, the black man. And I said, well, you're talking about a what if. I'm talking about a bullet put in a man's head because he didn't have a front license plate on his car and was acquitted twice in Cincinnati. A man that was shot 5 times that had a license like I do to carry a concealed weapon, that was sitting in the passenger seat and shot 5 times, and the cop said he thought he was reaching for a gun. So I ain't talking about a what if. I'm talking about a reality in this country. And what I understood is I multiplied this guy times 1,000 white males in this country. So there is a major division between us and them, because they feel because of a piece of cloth and a national anthem that was devised in a pub in London, England, that they've been offended because these black players are taking a knee. And we all know here in the media why they are taking a knee to protest the atrocities that's dealt on them, me included, in the United States of America. And 45 is thriving off of that business, that division in this country. Because he says nothing about the racists carrying the Confederate flags down in Charlottesville. He said there were some good people out there. Now, I don't know anybody that I know that's a racist, that's a good person. So 45 tends to thrive off of that controversy, tends to thrive and make himself known from that perspective. So we need to monitor what's going to happen with these players, because now they're writing new policies and about taking a knee and things of this nature. Nobody has said in his administration about the blacks that are being murdered by the white police officers in this United States of America. As many of you know, I have a student that works in the White House. She calls me Dad. And she was involved in a controversy with Ed Gordon a while back. Ed Gordon verbally attacked her on stage. I saw it. I don't know if you saw it. And shortly after that, her name is Omarosa for those of you, it's not Amorosa, it's Omarosa. For those of you that don't know, I received calls from the NABJ nationally to get my opinion, because some of them know that she and I are very, very, very close. And my opinion was, if Ed Gordon was sitting right here in this chair, I would tell him to his face that it was totally unprofessional the way that he mistreated a guest on his show. That if he wants to ask questions about 45, don't come to her, go to the owner of the station, go to 45 and ask him. Because as an employee of 45, she's got to defend her boss, whether we like it or not. She's got to, if she's going to keep her job. And so I was very upset at what I saw Ed Gordon do. Very upset. October 31st or 30th of 2015, there was an altercation in my front yard with a black man and a white man and me. Because I told the black kid to go home and not play around my car. His father came up to attack me. When I walked out of my porch, I had my 9 at my side, right here. And when he looked down and saw it, he turned around and walked off. Because there is a thing, a law that was written in the 1700s called stand your ground. The white next door neighbor, whose son had been a problem for years, riding in my yard, playing around my cars, throwing his dog poop from his yard into my yard because he wouldn't even put it in the trash. Now, I would never say anything to him. I would always mention it to the parents. And this went on for years. They saw my 9 and they called the police. So all of a sudden, I'm a menace to the neighborhood. The police took my statement, Xenia. The police took their statement, and that was on a Sunday. Wednesday, I get a knock at the door about 8:30. I'm watching television with my wife, and they've got a warrant out for my arrest for aggravated menacing. I go down to the holding cell, and I'm sitting there, and my wife is working one of the credit cards to bail me out. And there's a white guy laying on the floor, big guy, with a swastika on his arm. He's just laying there on it. They give you these real thin mats. I get up to go fill out some paperwork, so I leave the cell. I come back. He's got my mattress and his. So right then I have to make a decision whether I'm going to fight this guy in this holding cell or just sit there on that brick. Now, I'm in the process doing this 7-month ordeal of having prostate cancer surgery. I also had a heart attack. My doctors told me I was going to have a stroke because my blood pressure was 215. I took it upon myself to take a polygraph test. And for those of you that don't know, you can enter a polygraph test in a pre-trial. You can't enter it in the court of law in a regular trial, but in the pre-trial is where they look at all the evidence to see if they have a case. During this process, when the polygraph test was taken and given to my attorney, Ryan, right here in Dayton, I'm told that when the polygraph test is passed, that the case would be thrown out. Not true. Because I went to the prosecutor and first thing he said, I heard of WDAO and Turk Logan, but I ain't never heard of John Logan. And I just looked at this fool because they one and the same. And I'm like, what difference does that make? And after turning down 2 plea deals and firing 1 attorney and going into court for a trial, knowing that this person next door had been caught in a lie, they call it perjury, if he was going to go on the witness stand, I sit there for half an hour while the judge chambered everybody. Because I put a, you don't ever want to get yourself up against the wall with me. Because I will attack. And I take a magic marker and I put 000, comma, 000, comma, 000, comma. You put a number in front of it. And that's what I'm going to sue you for. And I told the judge, the prosecutor, the victim witness wanted me to move a half a mile outside of my house. Because all of a sudden now, I'm a menace to the neighborhood where I've been living for 25 years. Well, my house is a corporation, Logan Communications. But these white people don't know it. Why should they? And so when they read the polygraph test that was taken, they knew that they were in trouble. Because I told them, I'm not afraid of you. I'm here by myself. And I am going to attack you. And you can do whatever you want to do. You can bring your police department. You can bring your victim witness. You can bring the judge who was in law school when I was on the air at WDAO. And then when they heard me talk, they recognized who I was. Not that that should have meant anything. Because I had never committed a crime. I was never disorderly. I was never rude. I could have shot both of those guys for attacking me because I'm in front of my house with a license, standing my ground. But I didn't. I didn't raise my weapon. I didn't brandish it. I didn't point it. It was there strictly for my protection. And just like when my wife bailed me out, the first thing she said, I told you about that gun. And I said to her, it's not about the gun. It's about racism in Greene County. So I talked to my friend, Judge Walter Rice, and I talked to my other friend, Judge Alice McCullum, and they said, well, if you take a plea, you can't come back and sue them. Well, I knew that. I had to weigh having this prostate cancer and taking a plea just to get it done because the dates were running into each other. And one interesting thing that I noticed here in 2017, They are doing a Black Lives Matter in Greene County on the front lawn of the courthouse as we speak. Here it is right here. This is in 2017. And what they are, I'm told, are picketing about was a young man that was killed in Beaver Creek at the Walmart. And I believe the police officers were acquitted of that, as they usually do. I wrote a letter to the President of the United States. And the letter reads, "Dear Mr. President, 4 years old while recuperating at Miami Valley Hospital from surgery, the white boy that was in the room with me told his parents he didn't want to be in the same room with that nigger. I didn't know what a nigger was. 5 years old while playing with a white boy outside of my house on William Street. At 5 years old, he called me a nigger. So since I didn't know what that was, I called him a nigger. It just so happened my father was walking down the street from Station B, and he overheard it. And he grabbed me by the arm and beat me with that big old nail strap. And I'm like, well, why didn't he get a whooping? And nobody ever explained it to me. 1960, I lost my father to lung cancer. And I'm an only child, and I had to integrate Residence Park. And those of you that know Dayton know Residence Park is right next to Drexel. And the white kids from Drexel used to throw eggs and tomatoes and rocks at me in the 5th grade every day. And I learned the hard way what racism was. Vietnam War, 1969. I'm laying in the top bunk and my right testicle twisted. My left one was damaged because of lifting when I worked for the city of Dayton as a waste collector at 19, 20 years old. So the left one was dead. I didn't know it. My daughter was. My wife was 3 months pregnant with my 48-year-old daughter, so I didn't pay any attention to it. So my right testicle had twisted, and the drill sergeant said, "Logan, get out the bunk." And I said, "I can't get up." He grabbed the bunk and said, "Nigga, I told you to get up," and pulled the bunk toward him and slammed me on the floor. I limped down to infirmary and stood there up against the wall half an hour with a thermometer in my mouth. There were 500 men trying to get out. They were wearing women's panties and bras because it was during the Vietnam War. So a lot of guys were faking it. We call it marching, faking the funk. And when it got to me, finally, they realized I had a temperature of 108. I was supposed to be dead. They rushed me to the hospital, slit the sac open, untwisted the testicle, pinned it down, sent me home for 30 days and brought me back. Within 2 weeks of that, I caught spinal meningitis and pneumonia. This is his basic training. At 20 years old, I was infertile for the rest of my life because of this drill sergeant. And presently, as we speak, 48 years later, I am suing the federal government. And as of today, they are trying to decide how much money they're going to pay me for injury that happened that is their fault, that is actually everything is in writing, black and white, everything that they did and didn't do. From 1969, the hospital burned down, but I had all my medical records when I processed out of the search. Yes, ma'am.
You didn't have to worry about statute of limitations at all?
No. Not.
48 years is a long time.
Well, the injury was very serious, so it was during war. So statutes of limitations take place during war. Because the only thing that they tried to bring up was, you have a daughter that's X number, how can you say you're infertile? And I went and got my daughter's birth certificate and showed them that my first wife was pregnant 3 months prior to me getting drafted in the Vietnam War. So they're going to pay me. It's just they haven't decided how much, because I'm telling them that I want 100% disability from point of entry. And they're like, oh, wait a minute. Do you know how much money that is? Yeah, I know how much money that is. First thing I learned to do when I went to WDAL was count. And I count every day. When I was a young programmer at WDAL, sitting in the management meetings, I used to slide my chair back from Bud Crow, the owner of the station. So when he looked to his left, he would see the person sitting next to me. He wouldn't see me. And so he felt comfortable by saying, them niggas out there in West Dayton. And Joe Whalen would say, Bud, you know Turk's in the room. And he said, oh, Turk, we ain't talking about you. In 1984, I was an endorsed candidate for state representative, some of you may remember, on the Republican ticket. Ronald Reagan was my surrogate. He started this whistle-stop tour here in Dayton, Ohio. And after he left, the young Republicans, Bud Crow gave me it was very funny because he fired me in 1983 and saw me on stage with the President of the United States in 1984. And he had endorsed John Logan because he sat on the executive committee, but he didn't know John Logan was Turk Logan. And so he said, come by my office and I'll give you a campaign contribution. And I went by his office and he gave me $100. That was all I had for my whole campaign. And I did 12,000 votes. During that time for my campaign, I didn't anticipate getting any support from the black community because I wanted to serve. That's all I basically wanted to do. And you had Art Thomas and C.J. McLean and Clay Dixon and all the big Democrats here in Dayton. And they would laugh if I said I wanted to run for state representative. But the whites, they shot at me. I got shot at 6 times. I got my car stolen and burned after the President of the United States left. And so it was a very, very tough time. Now remember, I'm writing this letter to the President of the United States. So this fool understands that my life and his life are completely different, whether he agrees or not. And then I talk about Xenia, Ohio, and what happened to me like I explained. And so in ending the letter to him, I said, so Mr. President, if I take a knee to protest racism in America, I am sure, and I was talking about Omarosa, there are some people in your inner circle that understand why. And oh, by the way, if any white man would rather trade places with me, you're more than welcome. And I haven't had one taker. So I write presidents, and some of them write me back. When I was 8 years old, I wrote Eisenhower. I had decided from 4 years old to 8 years old to change my career. Because at 4 years old, I was listening to radio, it's AM radio, and I wanted to be a disc jockey. But at 8 years old, Russia had just sent Sputnik up, and so I wanted to get in the space program. So I wrote the President of the United States and said, hook me up, I'm ready to go. And he wrote me back. He said, Dear John, thank you for your interest in the space program. But first I suggest you get out of grade school. And then after grade school, you go to high school. Keep your grades up, and then after high school, you go to college, and then after college, you go to grad school. Hell, I didn't even know what a grad school was then. And then if your grades are good enough, you can apply to the NASA space program. And if in the event you get accepted, then we'll send you in space. And I got my calculator out. I said, well, heck, I'll be 20 years old. That's too old. And so I changed my career back to communications or radio. I wanted to be a disc jockey. And ironically, the person I listened to from 4 and 8 years old, Gene by golly Barry, some of you remember, Marsha doesn't know this, but she was there in 2009 when we both were inducted into the Broadcasters Hall of Fame. That Gene Barry was my first program director at WDAL, somebody I admired and listened to on the radio, a white guy that played black music. And Gene Barry was voted posthumously into the Broadcasters Hall of Fame in 2009. Who would have thought about that 50 years before it happened? but it happened right here in Dayton, Ohio. And so I was in the arcade, and some of you may remember you could walk in the arcade and pick up a book and start to read. Now they're, most of them are shrink wrap. And I was doing something I had no business doing, so I thought at the time. I was looking at the centerfold of a Playboy magazine, and I'm sure none of you ladies know what that is. And a reporter from the Dayton Daily News and a photographer walked up to me and said, "Excuse me, sir, we're doing interviews as to what turns you on and what turns you on." I looked down at that book and I started to smile, and I looked at her and said, "Radio and television. I'm just graduated from broadcasting school. I just got my license, so I'm looking for a job." And 2 weeks later, an article in the Dayton Daily News came out and said, "John Logan, nicknamed Turk, would like to be in radio." And WDAO called me up in 1971 and offered me a job. But what you may not know, I started out in sales. I didn't start out on the air. I started out in sales. And sales wasn't where my heart was, so I didn't do well in sales. And another broadcaster who's in the Hall of Fame, Clay Collins, said, "We have a position for you in the all-night show. It pays $50 a week." Now, I was working the Frigidaire, and I was making about $600 a week, and my family started laughing. They said, "You getting ready to do what? You getting ready to leave a job that's making $600, $2,400 a month from a job that makes $200 a month to a job that makes $200 a month?" I said, "Yes." I said, "Well, it doesn't make sense." And I discussed it with them. And I took the job. I was in the all-night show at WDAL, and I was backing up a remote broadcast. I didn't get a chance to go to the Tahiti hut. And after about a year and a half in the all-night show, I moved up to middays. A guy who just passed away that should be in the Broadcasters Hall of Fame, Marsha, Long John Silver, who just passed away, who started his broadcast career before I did, 1968, and went to Chicago. And what you may not know about John Silver is legally blind. And when he went to Chicago, it was difficult for him to read copy because of his sight. And so he got fired in Chicago and came back to Dayton. And when he came back to Dayton, I was program director by then. And we took a jeweler's light, magnifying glass about that thick, and we put it in the studio, and he turned the light on, so when he had to read copy, he looked down at it, and it made the letters this large, because it was radio, you couldn't see. And it worked for WDAO, and one of the greatest voices in broadcasting was back with us, Long John Silver. And I'm proud of being able to do that. Another thing that I was very proud of, 1976, Dayton was going through desegregation. And the school board, where Marsha is now at, which you don't know, the lady that just retired, Jill Mobley, that Marsha replaced, I believe, was my public relations director at WDAO. And she was with the school board for 35 years. But one of the things that they were concerned about was busing black children into white schools. So they called me and asked me to help. And I created the high school spirit contest. And all you had to do was put your school name on a little sheet of paper and have your principal or the school accountant identify how many votes you had. You had Meadowdale, you had Ralston, Dunbar, and so on and so forth. And after 2 weeks, I got a call from the superintendent and asked me to stop. And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because we can't get kids to do their homework. That's all they're doing, because we were given a $5,000 scholarship, a trophy, and a big dance." Well, after the contest was over with, Roth High School pulled up with a semi-trailer tractor rig. They had 1 billion votes, and I wasn't going to count them. But the good news was we did not have one racial incident, not one during that tenure. I'm proud of that. Yeah, I take credit for the Ohio players and Roger and Zapp and Heatwave and Lakeside and Fazo and Sun and Platypus and Slave and all those guys that didn't have record contracts, that I had to go to Bud Crow, Joe Whalen, and John Jay and explain we should try to play their music because it's good quality music. And these three white guys looked at me and said, they don't have record contracts, they're not on Billboard, why should we play their music? I had to convince them that. Yeah, I had to convince Bud Crow that the funk was funk and it wasn't the other word. Because if you said the other word by mistake, your career was over with. So we had to convince him of all those things to get that done. It wasn't that simple.
Man.
And
now, before you continue, let me ask you, through all of that adversity, through all of those things that you went through and strived through and pushed through, how did you do it without like losing control or losing your sense of self? How did you make it through? This is something I've always wanted to ask. You know, we in the black community, we don't talk about it. We don't talk about the racism that happened. It is not even that long ago. We don't talk about the personal experience like you shared with us.